I don't want to say that I have watched more professional wrestling than anybody on the planet in the last 2 to 3 months, but I have to be like in the top 1%, something like that. Now, before you call me crazy, hear me out. That number you saw in the thumbnail, 150 plus, is actually a massive underestimate. You see, that number doesn't take into account all of the current day wrestling that I watch almost every single day. So that number doesn't include every episode of Raw, which I have not missed, every episode of SmackDown, every WWE PLE, and now factoring in the AEW pay-per-views, watching some Dynamites, Collisions, and even Rampages. So that 150 plus, which has actually grown since the making of this video, is 100% matches and promos and documentaries that you guys have submitted for me so that I can learn more about pro wrestling. If you're not familiar, the way that I have approached in trying to learn the history is, instead of just going back and watching a bunch of top 10 videos and just randomly shooting my shot and hoping that I watched the memorable parts and the parts that really shaped pro wrestling, over on the Patreon, we are having this massive collection of you guys who are all bringing together your favorite wrestling matches from all different parts of pro wrestling, which means I'm not just watching this echo chamber of WWE and falling more in love with WWE. No, I did that just fine on my own in my first year of watching wrestling, which was just last year. What you guys have done has opened up my eyes to all these other promotions that I kind of knew existed, but if I'm being totally honest, I don't think I would have explored on my own, because I wasn't sure how that would really contribute to me learning more about the WWE. So many of the matches that we have watched together have been your favorite matches from New Japan, AEW, ECW, TNA, just about, there's random promotions that I've never even heard of all mixed in there. And it has been fascinating to see, in some cases, where some of my favorite wrestlers have originated from, and to see how they have grown through the years. Seeing all of these different styles come together, and just seeing all of these different ways that pro wrestling can be pro wrestling. Now, statistically speaking, the majority of you will not make it to the end of this video, so I want to take the opportunity to say thank you now instead. That's not just to the patrons, but it is also to those of you who have been here on YouTube for my live streams while I'm watching AEW and while I'm asking so many questions. You have no idea how much you have helped make it so that I'm not just learning through Google searches and top 10 lists like I mentioned earlier. I may not have discovered professional wrestling until my 30s, but I can honestly say that it is something that I'm so thankful that I got into and took a stab at. If you're interested in how I got into it, I have a whole video on that you're welcome to check out. Seriously, thank you so much for helping create this community that has been so fun to watch grow and see everybody sharing their matches with each other over in the Discord, over in the Patreon. Just, it's been awesome, and it's completely because of you guys, so thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. So after watching 150 plus submissions on top of all of the current day wrestling, what have I learned? Well, I can safely say that pro wrestling is the most interesting topic that I decided to dive into since I was a World War II nerd in high school, especially with our weekly watch-alongs of the Monday Night Wars documentary on the Patreon. But the best part about it has been learning through you guys. The amount of non-toxic discussion between New Japan fans, AEW fans, WWE fans coming together to really help answer these types of questions that I've had. The biggest thing that I have learned is that we all want the same thing. We all want to enjoy pro wrestling, but there's so many different ways that you can achieve that. The biggest thing that I've learned is that professional wrestling is an art that can be enjoyed in such a massive variety of different ways that the only opinion that I ever see that I feel like I hard disagree with is that any form of wrestling isn't real wrestling. Because at this point, the Patreon has become this place that you can go and submit your favorite match from this random obscure promotion that you remember from like 10 years ago or 20 years ago, even 30, 40 years ago in some cases, and give it a small platform where you can show it off to a bunch of other friends that just are really into pro wrestling. It's so cool seeing somebody submit one of their favorite all-time matches, and then shortly after I post a reaction or review of it, seeing all these comments from people that said, oh, I never got around to watching this one, or oh, I didn't even know these two had a match. So because of how much of this journey has been controlled and heavily influenced by you guys, I figured there's no better way to approach this video than letting that continue through you guys. I decided to let some of the patrons be the driver of this conversation, so let's see what you had to say. With the knowledge you have now, who are you most excited to watch more of? I'm realizing already some of these questions are going to involve favorites or least favorites, and that's going to be insanely hard, but one of the first ones that come to mind for this particular question is CM Punk. Seeing his skill on the mic and his promos in general, any segments he's involved in current day wrestling, combined with the things that you guys have sent from the previous eras, like the pipe bomb, the most recent one with him speaking to Triple H, and getting to see him unleash that a little bit in AEW. Not only am I excited to go back and see more. Oh, another one was the Money in the Bank situation with John Cena. That was fantastic. He like won the title and like left the arena. All that. That was cool. But given that he is a current day wrestler still, it has me even more excited to see him dive a little bit more into that side of him. So not only do I want to see more of that just in general from the past, because I'm sure he's done plenty across multiple promotions, I am very much excited to see that continue to culminate with the current feuds like Drew McIntyre. And knowing that John Cena is coming around for one last year, I'm assuming CM Punk and John Cena are going to have one last head-to-head situation. And those promos are going to be fantastic. If you're new here, I'm a really big storyline promo guy. That's really important to me and how I've enjoyed wrestling. Most overrated classic match that you've watched. So I'm not really going to answer exactly what you're asking because I don't really use that kind of language personally. My mentality is that every wrestler is someone's favorite. And regardless of how much you don't like them, somebody is connecting with that wrestler, and I feel like that could be said for wrestling matches as well in most cases. But the one I feel comfortable saying that I dislike the most, mostly because it was submitted during a themed week of send in your worst matches, was The Fiend versus Seth Rollins in a Hell in a Cell. That ending in no contest just felt wrong. It felt weird, and I also really hated that the whole match was just in like a red light. I feel like that bothered my eyes. I feel like I couldn't see it that well. I don't know if that was so that they could show blood more and it wouldn't be, I don't know. It was a really weird decision. But any match where I see The Fiend getting booed at the end, I feel like you missed the mark. It just feels like it completely defeats the purpose of a Hell in a Cell situation. I know it wasn't actually a DQ. It was a ref stoppage. But like, nobody's watching a Hell in a Cell match for someone to stop the match because they went too far. Isn't that kind of the point of throwing it in Hell in the Cell? That's got to be the one that I completely see why nobody loved how that one went. How often is there a nomination that sounds really interesting to you that doesn't get enough votes and you're tempted to watch them anyways? So for clarification, if you're not in the Patreon, sometimes we do themed weeks where a bunch of different matches are submitted for a poll and everybody votes on them. Usually like the top 2 or 3 get some sort of a watch along and a review and a reaction and all that. To answer your question, all the time. All the time I see matches like, ooh, that sounds like it'd be good. Ooh, that seems like it'd be really good. But I recognize that I can only watch a match for the first time once. And I also recognize that part of the enjoyment of the Patreon, it's kind of like wanting to show someone your favorite movie. And while they're watching it, you're kind of looking over and seeing like if they're reacting to the parts that are your favorite. I completely get that feeling. I know I've done that with TV shows and movies plenty in the past. So because of that, as tempted as I am to just pull it up and watch it myself, I just know it'll be more meaningful if it does win a poll that person gets to watch someone watch their favorite match. And instead of me just kind of watching, be like, oh yeah, I already saw it. It was great. And considering I've had no shortage of wrestling to watch over the last few months, I'm not really in a rush to hurry up and go watch those on my own time. Who are some current day wrestlers, WWE or otherwise, that you want to see some past matches of to get you more invested in them? Man, there's a few ways I could go with this question, but if you're kind of saying like maybe someone I'm not currently invested in that I feel like maybe has had a good past, that would help. For example, Shayna Baszler is someone that I have not been able to find myself invested in the current day. But whenever I say that on stream or just say that in general, usually somebody says that I need to go back and watch some NXT days of hers when she was a badass. So while that probably wouldn't help how I'm watching her today, because right now she just really kind of bores me, I'm very curious to see this era that everybody's always referring to. So maybe if she has like a top match or two that everybody loved when she was in NXT, that would be cool. But someone that I'm already invested in that I would just love to see more of, my sleeper pick here has got to be Io Sky. Io Sky is someone I feel like I see so many current day matches of, and every time it feels like it's a banger. And I always hear people talk about how good she also used to be, like how many great matches she's had in the past. And that's someone I don't think I have actually gone back and seen a single like historic matchup. I mean, I would love to see her in any other promotion that she was in coming up to this point. And the more I talk about it, the more I start to think that that could be one that I end up making one of my favorite wrestlers if I got a little bit more context of where she came from. The matches I've sent in so far being from the 80s / territories, how did you like the presentation of them versus what you've been watching for the past year? If you're asking specifically about the presentation, it definitely feels more like the further you go back, you can definitely see that the protection of kayfabe was there in the sense that the presentation was making it feel more like a real prize fight, making it feel almost like a boxing match. And as much as I wish I could be someone who could sit here and be like, yes, I love it just as much as the current day, I don't want to lie to you. I am happy that it's gone more into an era of everybody's on the same page that this is not real and that it is a scripted show that is full of extremely talented athletes that are putting on a show. I like the over-the-top theatrics. I like the over-the-top entrances and explosions and pyro and the packages that get put together pre-match. And I understand that when you go back to those 80s matches, it wasn't necessarily a full creative choice. I mean, we just have way more technology now to do those things that I love. So if I take that into consideration, I do heavily appreciate what the 80s built on so that we could have what we have today. But generally speaking, when I look at those older matches, I'm typically watching it from a very intrigued interest. Like, I feel like I'm learning and seeing a lot of where we came from and how we got here, more so than I am on the edge of my seat watching the match. I think you'll find when I watch those matches, I'm kind of watching just for subtle differences, seeing how the ref behaves compared to how they do now, seeing what types of moves constitute a finisher back in the day, and also just seeing how the crowd reacts, especially knowing that during that time, kayfabe was protected a lot more, and seeing the crowd reactions thinking that there's a high likelihood that they think that it's a real fight. So I do enjoy watching those sprinkled in along the way. I don't think I would want to watch nothing but 80s matches for a week or 2 weeks or anything like that, which I feel like is fair. If you were the president in Rick and Morty and you had access to a portal that sends people through space and time, who would you send through? For example, I'd be interested in seeing Prime Shawn Michaels in 2010's New Japan, or current day MJF or Rhea Ripley in the Attitude Era, or NXT Adam Cole on the current Raw roster. That is such a hilarious way to ask that, first of all. Second of all, I love your picks, especially MJF or Rhea Ripley in the Attitude Era. I would just have loved to see Rhea Ripley and Chyna in the same, just in the same conversation, being on the same show. But I'm gonna steal one of yours, first of all. MJF in the Attitude Era, I'll even be more specific. I think MJF in a feud with like a babyface Rock would have been insanely cool, or really babyface anything else. I think MJF being the heel would have been perfect, but a babyface in the Attitude Era going after MJF would have been extremely entertaining. If I'm creating a little bit of a fantasy match and sending someone back or bringing someone forward, I think I would send back Will Ospreay to have a match with Eddie Guerrero. Now, to be fair, I haven't gotten to see a ton of Eddie matches, but the ones that I have seen, I really get why he was some people's favorite wrestlers back in the day. And while Will Ospreay feels like a little bit more of a flippy high flyer, and Eddie, while being a bit of a high flyer, I feel like I was also using a lot of moves that just made him look strong. And if I'm wrong on that, sorry. If he's more of a high flyer, I've only seen a few of his matches. I think that would be extremely entertaining. Screw it, I'll get greedy here and put Prime Rey Mysterio in a triple threat with those two. Actually, this is making me just want to watch a triple threat of 3 really insane high flyers. We get like Dragon Lee, Ricochet, and Will Ospreay in a match or something. How are you holding up recognizing the amount of new wrestlers? Would you like hints included in a suggestion regarding if you've seen a wrestler before? Or do you prefer the challenge of recognizing them on your own? So me and Tally, by the way, Tally's my fiance. She does all the watch-alongs on Patreon with me. We've done this whole pro wrestling journey together. We really do like trying to identify it ourselves. So that would be cool if we could keep the current thing going where people don't usually clarify whether or not we've seen someone before, especially if they're not listed to be in the match. Got to the point now where it feels like she's actually better at recognizing some of the more obscure names than I am. With that being said, I do appreciate checking the comments afterwards and you guys let me know, oh, by the way, that dude is actually someone you've seen before. If I totally miss it, yeah, I'm very thankful whenever you guys go in the comments and clear that up for me, because I'm always in the comments after those videos go up. Who are your top 5 favorite wrestlers to watch that you only learned about through Patreon matches? And name your favorite match you've watched from each of those wrestlers and who you'd like to see more of in the future Patreon submission. All right, I'm not gonna give you a full top 5. I was struggling with that. I was going through the list of matches and I was really struggling to find ones that I had never heard of at all before the Patreon. But I'm going to give you two, and I think I'm really confident in how I feel about these two. So the first one being Rob Van Dam. He is definitely someone I did not know existed until we started doing the Patreon. And my favorite match of his was, I believe it was against John Cena at an ECW pay-per-view. Actually, I think it was one of the ones where they went back and because it would have been John Cena. That makes sense. I think it might have been one of the one night stand ones. Not only was the crowd electric in it, I really do appreciate Rob Van Dam in general in the ring. I just hate Bill Alfonso. So if you send more of that, please either give a warning or maybe find the ones where Bill's not involved. I hate that whistle. Now, my other pick, I'm going to completely butcher their names, and this is going to be one that I think a lot of you are not going to be expecting, especially those of you who are already on the Patreon, because I don't feel like I've talked about them much. You got to remember, I'm also trying to narrow this down in terms of people I've only discovered through the Patreon. I'm going to say the first ever New Japan match that I ever watched on the Patreon, and that was between Mayu Iwatani and Utami Hayashishita. I'll put them on the screen because I probably completely destroyed those. I'm sorry. But it was especially effective because of the fact that it was the first New Japan match that I had watched all the way through. I got to not only get to know these wrestlers and how well they work together, but I really enjoyed seeing the New Japan crowd, the way the refs worked, it just seeing how much different it was in New Japan compared to what I'm used to watching day to day. And I'm pretty sure I've seen those two in another match later down the line. It might have been the one where there was like 12 women in a cage match or something like that, but I would really enjoy seeing some more of them. It sounds like they had a lot of feuds going on. It sounds like they were friends or weren't friends. I believe, if I remember correctly, whoever submitted it said that those two constantly flipped who was babyface and heel and were constantly in feuds, something like that. So I would love to see more of them. Were there any standout matches in ones you've watched on Patreon that seem to have a huge impact on the industry as a whole? For example, you said the other day that Sasha versus Charlotte versus Becky match seemed important given its role in evolving women's wrestling into what it is today. There's going to be a portion of you that absolutely hate my answer here, but I'm gonna explain. I'm gonna choose Invisible Man versus Invisible Stan. Yes, this was a match that was submitted. If you haven't already seen it and you're on the Patreon, look it up on there. And if you're not on the Patreon, just look up the match on YouTube. Now, maybe it isn't something that I think evolved wrestling. I want to clarify I'm kind of changing your question a little bit because I feel like this is interesting and important enough to talk about. This is more so a match that changed how I see wrestling as a whole and how it's evolved my vision of what pro wrestling means. This was the moment I truly realized that pro wrestling is an experience that everybody in the room is contributing to. Pro wrestling is not just about the two people in the ring. It's not just about the referee in the ring. It's about a culmination of everybody involved. Now, do I want to watch 10, 15, 30, 100 matches of nobody in the ring and everybody just kind of goofing around and making a bit of a joke of it? No, absolutely not. Don't misunderstand here. It was more of a one-off moment that really put on display the extreme case of how important the crowd and the referee are in selling a match. I can even think of another one recently that I don't remember exactly who was in the match. There was one point where somebody hit a remote and put the entire arena or whatever, the entire room in slow motion, and all the wrestlers were moving in slow motion as well, but so were the fans. Now, there's going to be some of you that hate that stuff. There's going to be some of you that think that's bad for pro wrestling. I disagree with you. I can respect where you're coming from if you really just are passionate about a certain type of wrestling, but those moments really highlight how important it is for the crowd to almost sell along with the wrestlers. A crowd cheering heavily during a wrestling match that they know is predetermined and that they know is scripted, it really shows a group of people's ability and desire to suspend their disbelief, to just enjoy themselves, to have a good time, to enjoy the show and make the show better. So yeah, watching a referee officiate two invisible dudes that are just not doing anything, but the crowd getting into it and responding based on how the referee is reacting, that is just an extreme one-time case. Maybe it's happened more than once, but for me, it's an extreme one-time scenario that I got to watch where I recognized we're all in on this. Everybody watching is a part of it, and it's so much more fun to be a part of that group that is just trying to enjoy themselves and not picking apart every little detail. I know that's not exactly what you were asking, and I apologize for kind of changing your question, but This was the closest opportunity I could find to talk about how important I feel like those matches actually were. And I don't think they were just the joke matches that I think most people would have expected me to see them as. What so far has been your favorite era of WWE to go back and watch? That's probably gonna be the Monday Night Wars documentaries that we watch every week at this point. Seeing the WWE and WCW compete is very interesting to me. One of the most common comments that I get whenever we do those reactions and those watch-alongs is people saying, hey, remember, this is a WWE produced show and the winners usually write the history books and all that. I understand that. I'm taking most of this with a grain of salt, but I think regardless, it's extremely interesting, and it shows at a bare minimum why you should be rooting for multiple promotions. This is why I'm actively right now, as of the recording of this video, I am actively trying to watch more AEW because I think it would be more fun to just be into more like current day wrestling. But watching that documentary has shown me how important that competition is in pro wrestling. When there's only one show, complacency is exactly what you're gonna get. And I want to root for a show like AEW to grow enough to force the WWE to feel like they've got someone on their heels. It's the same reason why I don't understand the hate that goes back and forth. I would think AEW fans should also want WWE to succeed, because then Tony Khan and the AEW are going to want to keep amping up the heat. But seeing it actually take place and seeing the WCW and the WWE constantly looking at what the other's doing and trying to one up it, it's so interesting to me, and I'd love to see that continue in current day wrestling. Have you noticed any specific patterns or themes in older matches / feuds that seem less common in modern wrestling? One thing that really stands out is I feel like the further I go back, the more finishers were finishers. Like, finishers were something you would race to get to, and if they got off their finisher, the match was probably going to be over, with the exception of like a rope break or somebody breaking up the pin. If you got off your finisher, there's a pretty good chance the match is over. And as I watch current day WWE, and especially when I watch AEW, I feel like there's this overusage of kicking out of someone's finisher. I don't really like that. I don't really love seeing, I feel like I've seen, especially I want to say it was more so in the pay-per-views that I've been watching lately with AEW. It feels like the match goes on like one kick out or sometimes two kickouts more than I would have personally preferred. I've seen WWE do this in current day as well, but I feel like I really started noticing it now that I'm watching more AEW. Is there a match you wish you could have attended in person and seen the match through the eyes of the crowd? Okay, if I can only pick matches from the Patreon, since that's kind of the point of this whole video, the first one that comes to mind, I've got Jeff Hardy versus CM Punk in a TLC match, SummerSlam 2009. And that's mostly because, I would love to see a ladder match in person. I would love to see someone with the likes of Jeff Hardy in a ladder match in person. But also, that match has a particular ending to it that if you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it. I highly encourage you go watch that match. But the ending of that match and what happens in the post-match section is something that I would love to witness in person and get to just experience that moment live. My secondary choice is actually one we just watched recently. It would be the Hogan versus Rock Icon versus Icon match. And that's only because I love being a part of absolutely electric crowds. And there was something about watching that was just, it felt like one of the most alive crowds I have ever seen. And just seeing everybody just kind of just absolutely screaming at the top of their lungs every time Hogan did this thing or whatever. It just seems like it would have been fun to just be there for and be a part of that crowd. You seem to have a habit of noticing signs in the crowd. What's your favorite or most memorable sign that you've spotted so far? I'll be honest with you, I can't really think of a specific sign that really stood out to me. But I will say that you are 100% right. Whenever I'm watching these matches, I find myself looking in the distance and I'm looking around the arena. One of the things I'm doing is just, I'm looking at the merch sometimes, but I'm also looking at the signs, because it feels like an opportunity to kind of look into a time capsule of what was over at that place in time, what people were frustrated with, and just getting to see how fans would express themselves. It's even more fun the further you go back because signs were more prevalent, but getting to see what type of merch and what type of signs was popular during that match, I feel like that's a little bit of extra context that I really do appreciate. So yeah, you are 100% right. That's something that I do in pretty much every single Patreon match. With the knowledge you have now, what is your perfect length for a match? For example, hour long, 40 minutes, 30, 20. I think for just an ideal, just a regular 1v1 match, somewhere in the 20 to 25 minute range is pretty, that feels pretty good to me. I feel like I really want to reserve my 30 plus, my 30, 40 or longer for some sort of a big payoff at a pay-per-view or a PLE. Sometimes I feel like matches are a victim of just wanting to be longer, and so there ends up being some filler in the match that feels like you're just kind of waiting for the next spot. I really enjoy the higher paced matches that kind of, they know exactly what they're trying to do, they execute it. Maybe there's a couple of moments where you kind of let the moment build a little bit, and we got our pin within 20-25 minutes. All right, I have combined a few of these submissions because they were very similar, from Wade Cruz, Karen, and Prototype, all asking in different ways what has surprised me the most, whether it's about wrestling or the promotions or the wrestlers themselves. The thing that has shocked me the most, and it's not even close, is how much I ended up enjoying watching the non-mainstream promotion. Watching old ECW, TNA, New Japan, anywhere in between has helped enormously by seeing wrestlers that I recognize in current day WWE and AEW. I didn't know. That's the thing that surprised me. I didn't know so many of these wrestlers came from these other shows and wrestled there together. In hindsight, that makes a ton of sense. But again, I was brand spanking new. I didn't realize that they all came from all these different promotions. They knew each other. They had big matches together on these other shows, and then came together to, put on the characters and the shows that they're putting on now. And that's gotta be my favorite stuff to watch, is probably watching older matches from older promotions, or just older matches in general of wrestlers that I'm invested in current day. I know that's not a question that got asked, but I'll just tell you right now, my favorite types of matches to watch on the Patreon are the ones that involve wrestlers that I currently watch every week, that are showing them where they came from or feuds that they had leading up to this. So it can even be from 5 years ago when they were still in NXT or early WWE years, or even going all the way back to how they were on TNA, New Japan, or whatever. That is so fascinating to me, and those are the ones I look forward to the absolute most when I see them pop up. What are the top 3 worst booking decisions you've ever witnessed in terms of storyline or match results? Okay, I got your 3. The first one I mentioned earlier, Fiend and Rollins in the Hell in a Cell. I won't talk about that anymore, but that was brutal. The second one was the finger poke of doom. The funny thing is, when I watched that, I didn't really fully get the context. I was just confused by it. But now that I've learned about the NWO and how all that went down from the Monday Night Wars videos, that one hits even worse, but in a good way of just, it hits in terms of I understand it more, but man, it makes it even worse. And then lastly, I'll just group the entire Roman Reigns big dog push as a bad booking decision. The whole forcing a babyface on everybody that nobody wants and nobody likes, that just feels weird. Who's someone you were impressed with but were surprised didn't make it further, whether it be accomplishments or appearances in matches you've ended up watching thus far? I think the easy answer to that after watching some of the matches has been El Generico. It seemed like he had such a perfect chemistry with the likes of Kevin Owens. It seemed like he had the energy, the desire, and just the skill to keep up with and actually carry some of his former matches, that it just feels weird that he didn't get utilized later on in his career. How no major promotion decided to scoop him up and try to see what they could actually grow from that character is beyond me. Which wrestlers from all the matches you've watched so far do you think had the best chemistry in the ring? Ooh, that's tough, because I still feel new enough that it's sometimes tough for me to identify ring chemistry. So I can't really always tell if it's just, I'm just feeling that way because it's a banger match, or if it's truly a ring chemistry. But 2 that pop off at the top of my head is Will Ospreay and Ricochet. Seeing their match was really cool, and it's got me excited for whenever I know they're building something up for them in AEW, so I'm pretty excited to see what they put together in the coming weeks. My other choice, I'm gonna go with Johnny Gargano and Adam Cole, baby. That was a feud that I feel like really got me into appreciating not just DIY, but specifically Johnny Gargano in general, and it really got me enjoying Adam Cole's work. And it's one of those situations where it's like, oh, I know that guy from AEW, so seeing their chemistry was really cool. I don't know if I've seen a ton of Adam Cole outside of that feud. It's not at the top of my head right now. But in terms of, if you're just asking me wrestlers I think had good chemistry, those were matches that I felt like I constantly was looking forward to seeing the next portion of. Oh, is it because of their chemistry? I don't know. Maybe. That's a tough one for me. Who is Max's favorite wrestler? Well, he's on the bottom left of your screen right now, and if you look closely, you can see he has a Tribal Chief Roman Reigns plushie toy. So yeah, I'm gonna say his favorite's probably the big dog. Are you going to do a Women's Week theme soon? Because I just looked at the list of your matches, and not a lot of women matches are on the list. There's plenty of women matches that are overlooked because of the era taking place in, and plenty of diamonds in the modern era as well. Typically the way this works, and if you're unfamiliar with the Patreon or if you're newer to it, that's usually the way it works, is the tally tier level patrons send whatever they want, and then once in a while we throw in a poll that everybody can kind of throw in whatever match they want to throw into the mix, and oftentimes we'll have you guys vote on a theme for the week. So sometimes that might be women's matches, sometimes it might be NXT, sometimes it might be AEW, or maybe it'll just be a promo week, stuff like that. So we've already actually done a women's week, so you can go back and you can find some of the ones that came in then, but I'm sure we'll end up doing another one. I became a massive wrestling fan on my own, just kind of watching it on my own, getting into the WWE on my own, but you guys have come together to elevate my fandom and Tally's fandom to a different level of appreciation, of getting to understand the history of not just these promotions, but the wrestlers, getting to see where they've gone now. It has been such an incredible experience that we've all kind of come together and done this. And so if you made it this far in the video, this is probably the community for you. I heavily invite you to check out the Patreon if you'd like. There is a free tier there, so you can just see what it's all about without spending a dime. And then later on, you could always join in if you want to, or just join the Discord. There's chat along, so while you're watching AEW every week, or if you're watching WWE every week, you can have some friends to watch along with. And then 24 hours a day, there's wrestling discussion there because we've had people join from all around the world. A link to the Discord and the Patreon will be found below. Thank you everybody so much for watching this video. Thank you so much for all the support of making this channel, the Patreon, the Discord, everything that has culminated to this community of just people who love all forms of wrestling, all shapes and sizes, all promotions. I'm looking forward to seeing where else we go with this. Thank you everyone from the Patreon that is flying up the screen. I will see you all in the next one.